Okay, so thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. I have the pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Dr. Andrey Chuprygin from the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, who will deliver a lecture on the topic of how the Mediterranean has featured within the international relation, the international history of Russia from the times of the Tsarist Empire to nowadays. So quite a very long time. And I thank you, Andrei, for being at disposal, for sharing with us his knowledge. He's a long practitioner of the Arab world, and he now teaches at Vishka, at the Higher School of Economics, and he's one of the leading experts of the Arab world in Russia, and arguably even beyond Russia. And so thank you for being here, and I skip directly to give you the voice, and so then we start with the question and answer after your lecture. Thank you very much, Andrei.
Okay, yes, Marcia, thank you very much. The pleasure is, as always, mine. I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad, and thank you for having me with you. Two things before we start. The first thing is that I hate lectures, and everybody knows that, including my students. So I will try and structure this as a discussion, if possible, although this discussion will be using my short presentations to make my several points at the beginning. And the second thing is that, the topic of lecture is extremely wide. We are, of course, incapable of squeezing everything from Catherine the Great to Putin into 1 hour of discussion, but we will try our best through highlighting several things, which I think important to understand what is going on between Russia and the Mediterranean nowadays. So those are 2 points, and now I will try and switch on my presentation. I tried it before, and it looked as though it should be working. It is not working now. No, it is working. Okay. I will be playing with this presentation from the beginning to the end or whatever. I don't see. Do you see anything? Ah, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, it so happens that I'm starting with the end of the presentation, but from the end we will go back to the beginning and see how haphazardly talking about this, so see how it happens. First, the thing is that I forgot to mention the third issue of our discussion here, to look into the historical perspective of one issue or the other actually depends on which hill you are standing on, or which chair you occupy, from which side you take a look at this picture. And depending on the side, of course, you get your results. I will be talking today from the position of Moscow, or from the position of Russia. In plain words, I will try and discuss with you on how Russia perceives its Mediterranean policy, its engagement in the area, why and for what reasons. Because if we start talking about the Washington perspective, it will be absolutely different, trust me, on what I'm saying. The problem is that in general, I notice that there is a big gap in understanding what is going on from the Russian perspective and how it is connected to international politics that Russia is engaged, in particular in the Mediterranean. It looks as though a certain bunch of political leaders in the West have difficulty to understand what drives Putin, what drives the country, and somehow, some way or another, for whatever reasons, they separate the Russian leadership from the majority of the population of Russia, which actually is a mistake, because it's sometimes very interesting to remember the wording on Winston Churchill, who in 1939 said, and I quote, that Russia is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside of an enigma. It's quite an ample description of Russia, but of course from the Western perspective. From the Russian perspective, the things are a bit clearer. To start and to go into the Russian politics, one has to, it is worth actually to try and understand the basis, psychological or cultural basis, which lies under those politics we are talking about. And this basis actually goes back to Russia being the target of invasions for quite a long time in the history. To mention just a few is that Poles coming through the European plain in 1605, followed by the Swedes in 1707, the French in 1812, then of course the Germans in 1914 and 1941, and that's just naming a few. Here I have a picture. I found it in one very interesting paper in the internet, which found that is the European, the Great European Plain, which actually was the theater of very swift and fast marches of different types of conquering battalions going to conquer Russia, probably Moscow or the regions of Moscow, and the Russian people, they still remember that. So probably the nature of the Russian policies, whether during the Tsarist times or the times of the USSR, or during the Putin's times, might be explained if we understood what is overlaying this drive, as they call it, imperial drive, to get acknowledged, to get stronger, to obtain territories, whatever it is, as a buffer zone. Actually, the whole history, starting from the first emperor of Russia, which was Ivan the Terrible, is also something which we will discuss now. The whole drive was to not simply to conquer somebody, but to facilitate buffer zones, territorial buffer zones, to protect the heartland of the country from the outside invasion. What's happened now is that, for example, this is very illustrative maps. That is the Russian Empire in 1914. That is the territory it occupied. Now this is from 22 to 39, the territory which is occupied. Okay. Now it's 45 to 91 territory, the heartland territory, the territory occupied, territory under control, and the allied territory. And now that is the territory which Russia occupies today. You see the loss of territorial loss that Russia suffered during that period might be the explanation to what we are going to talk about. On top of this, there is a very deep psychological distrust or mistrust from Russians towards the West. One cannot deny that because that is ingrained in the majority of people, starting with, for example, the attitude or the understanding or the belief that the Westerners robbed Russians from all the achievements, starting from the first lamp or the wireless, which was not, as according to Russians, which was not created by Marconi but by Popov, or the first steam train, which was also somehow invented in Russia, and the West robbed us out of it, and ending with the West aggrandizing one of the weakest Russian writers by the name of Dostoevsky, which somehow became in the West on the top shelf of Russian writers, while in Russia it is in the last shelf of writing Russians, and that for Russia is for Russians, the majority of Russians, is the explanation or the demonstration of how the West misinterprets what Russia is all about. And let's go back to history. I hope the presentation starts now. Somehow it is. Somehow it is not. Oh yes, no. Yes. Is that working? Let's see.
Works, and if you can, yes. Okay.
It works, huh? Okay, because it takes a hell of a lot of time to load, which is not happening in Zoom, and now it is blinking. Okay, I hope we will manage. Okay. Well, as a short preface, let's go back to the closest history that we have now, starting with Barack Obama, who somehow, with a feat of diplomatic upmanship, told the world that Russia is a small regional power, which also was quite a blow, psychological blow to Russian leadership, and never helped the bilateral relations. However, the Eastern Mediterranean developments of recent basically proved the opposite. While Cyprus, Egypt, and Israel actually see Moscow the same way as through the Soviet Union history, the major Arab states saw Moscow as a leverage, quite effective leverage, in their talks in Brussels, with Brussels and Washington, preferably Washington, which actually looks like the Soviet Union and subsequently Russia today has its not insignificant role in the area. On top of this, the Syrian adventure, military and political, which I'm not sure that we're going to discuss that. Well, I'm going to talk about it a lot. I will be ready to answer some questions about that, because although it is a significant military foray of Russia, and the first one since the Soviet Union, since Afghanistan, actually, abroad, I don't see that it is a gist of the things that are going around Mediterranean, and I don't think that it plays the decisive role in the shaping of the Mediterranean policy and Russia inside that. But there is absolutely no doubt that the recent engagement of Russia in the Mediterranean, if not marks a new era in the Russian-West relations, At least it counterbalances everything that we've got used to during the last three decades. The legitimate question is that where is Russia and where is the Mediterranean? We all recollect the map. Russia is quite far away from the Mediterranean, but it looks as though it's not too far away of that. The quest to the south has started a long time ago, with basically the first, as I said, the first Russian emperor by the name of Tsar Ivan the Terrible. Actually, a remark, it is also a matter of grievance for the Russians, because in Russian, Ivan the Terrible is not the terrible, he is the fearsome. It's the West who called him the Terrible. So it's a point of grievances for us as well, because he was not terrible. He was fearsome, yes, but not terrible in the sense of the word in English. Nevertheless, the quest to south started with him, actually, and there was a significant reason for that. The first and foremost, as I see it, was the attempt to reach the all-year functional waterways, because Russia was locked with the Northern Ocean, Northern Sea, which actually is frozen the major part of the year, and does not provide an extremely effective trading route to the outside. So the quest to the south was first of all connected with the attempt of substituting the frozen northern waterways by the all-year functional waterways of the Black Sea. And of course, from the Black Sea, it's a short route through Bosphorus and Dardanelles to the Mediterranean. The second reason was the attempt at countering, or at least making the Europeans more busy with looking to the south of them, to the southern borders, and that way lessening their pressure on the western borders, Western European borders of Russia, through managing the European policies via the Balkan Slavs and the Orthodox areas in the Balkans. You know that the Balkan policy of Tsarist Russia was one of the basically major trends or directions of the international politics of Russian Tsarist empire. Of course, as an extension to that, that was the attempt of setting the base camp on the southern border of Europe, and thus shaping the area of influence in the outskirts of the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. The trade. The Russians were always keen traders, and the major, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the main amount of trade, international trade or foreign trade, was done with southern customers, Arabs, Turks, and Sassanid Iranians, not the West. That is that the capability to access the direct trading routes without intermediaries to the paying trading customers in the south was deemed extremely important. The religious factor, I always stress that, because somehow this factor is being diminished occasionally, but the religious factor always played a decisive role, or at least a close to decisive role in the international policies, and the Mediterranean was a direct access to the cradle of Eastern Orthodoxy, which was extremely important to Russian elites. And naturally, the Mediterranean routes attracted attention, not at the beginning, because until Catherine the Great, the drive was to open the routes, dry routes to the Black Sea, to provide the security of access to the Black Sea, and starting with Catherine the Great, the direct expansion to Mediterranean started. That was the First Archipelago expedition, 1769, which actually is named Archipelago because it was sent to the Greek archipelago, island archipelago, and it was waiting on the Greeks to revolt against Turkey. It didn't happen. Then 4 incursions since then till 1774. There have been 5 to 6 quite impressive military victories. There were political failures through the failures to provide or to reach favorable political agreements because of the pressure from Britain and France. There came the liberation of Crimea, which put the end to the Tatar forays in the south. That was very important as an Islamic factor, because by this time already, as a result of Peter the First military campaigns in near Caspian regions, Russia already had quite a significant Muslim population. So the pacification and isolation of Crimea from the outside influence was extremely important, in addition to the free access to the Black Sea. And from the Black Sea, of course, the Mediterranean was very close and natural. And there came certain results of that, starting with the Greek Revolt of 1821 to 29 against the Ottomans, which actually played the Russian hand with extending the Russian influence into the area, the Eastern Mediterranean, and through also consolidating the Orthodox influence in the region. The Levantine connection, which came and went off and on status, and reached the extent when the Levant, the current Lebanon, officially turned to the Russian Tsar, asking to include the Lebanon into the Russian Empire. It never happened this time because Russian elites were not interested in such an extension to that. And of course, the relations with the Maltese Order. All this was a prelude to a proactive Mediterranean policy, and the relations with the Maltese Order, I will sort of talk a little bit about it, because I see it as one of the best examples of what the Russian Tsarist elite was actually planning for the Mediterranean. Never happened, but we will see now how and why. That's Paul the First, right? The misunderstood, often misunderstood, and frequently forgotten Russian Tsar and politician, and his project of the Mediterranean and Malta. You know probably that Paul I was quite pro-military, and he was the one who actually started in earnest to refurbish and reorganize the Russian fleet. And he actually started in continuation with Catherine the Great's policy in the Mediterranean. He started taking proactive, quite risky and quite unexpected steps in the area. Previously, Catherine the Great actually understood the importance of the Maltese order in the midst of the Mediterranean, and she started creating relations with the order, with Grand Masters, to the extent that for a certain period of time, a lot of Russian marine officers were studying in Malta, were conducting practices in Malta, because the Maltese order by that time already were the most experienced European military sailors and maritime commanders. So the Russian marine officers educated in Malta, but that was on and off going with exchange of letters and good intentions until Paul I came into power. And here the story begins, which actually is worthy of international detective status. In 1797, the Paul I, Paul of Russia, concluded the convention of establishment of this order in Russia. This order meaning the Maltese order, placing the order in actually financial dependency on Russia. He started with the finance. By 1797, the revenue of Maltese order, 90% was Russian donations and 10% from other sources. So you can see that the order was financially quite dependent on Russia. This convention called for establishing the priorate of order in Russia on the grand scale, and the Polish noble Raczynski was sent with the covenant, with the convention to Malta, but he was arrested in Ancona by the French, and the convention was published in the French press on a good tradition to reveal the anti-Western policy of Russian Tsarist elite. Okay, the scandal started. The scandal, together with anti-Russian campaign in France and then the rest of the Europe, Grandmaster Rohan, the Rohan, dies out of grief, which is completely interesting thing. Why of grief and why he died, I don't know. Maybe he was just removed from the scene. And the new Grandmaster Ferdinand von Hompesch, very famous one, regardless of the scandal and the campaign, signs the covenant, and Paul I was announced the protector of the order. Unfortunately, there was no plan left by Paul I on paper, so we cannot, with all understanding, read his remarks of what he actually planned for Malta and why was this obsession with the Maltese order and obsession with the island of Malta at all. But according to what he did, we can somehow come to a conclusion what actually he was he was thinking. And to say the least, I suspect that Malta was in Paul I's plans as the first overseas military base for Russia. And he actually basically approached, where he came close to the realization of this plan. Although, as usual, the best plans put on paper never survive the first encounter with the enemy. This same thing happened with the Maltese plan of Paul I. But there was a secret plan of the Knights Hospitalier. As we understand that, the existence of this plan has been described a lot in historical research, in historical books, been passed from generation to generation through stories told. This secret plan was by the time Napoleonic France was threatening Malta, and it was a threat which was understood by von Hompesch very clearly, and the secret plan of Knights Hospitalier was to be incorporated into Russia and to play on a Russian commission the role of the centralized lobby in Europe in favor of Russian political and military interests. And that's what have happened, if not Napoleon, who ruined those plans by conquering Malta. As a result of Napoleonic takeover of Malta, actually, to make the story short, Hompesch was actually sent into exile, and to replace him, the Convention of Maltese Order has chosen Paul I as Grand Master of the Order, and more to this, the new Grand Master of the Order, Paul I, incorporated the symbols of order. You can see that even on the signet of the Tsarist Russia. See that here, the Maltese crest, and also started wearing the robe of the Grand Master. So it looked as though the Maltese Order now had its new home and new master, new Grand Master. I would say that. But the Grand Master was there, the Order was there, Malta was in the hands of Napoleon, although not everything was lost, and a forgotten history in 1798, when the fleet of Admiral Nelson started liberating Malta, the Russian fleet under Admiral Ushakov was in alliance with him and took part in the liberation of Malta. If you go to Malta now and listen to a historical survey there, the Maltese version, you will not hear about the Russian fleet under Ushakov. If you go to the historical museum in France, you can find it there. As per agreement with Britain, Malta, after the takeover by the Allied fleet, should have been turned to Russia for control. But everything got lost when London, once again, as was a custom, reneges an agreement and establishes its own base in Malta. Of course, it is better to have the British base in Malta than the Russian one. Everyone understood that outside Moscow. Garnering. The whole thing went to shambles in 1801 when Paul I was assassinated, and Alexander I, his successor, he shied away from the whole project, not only Maltese project, but Mediterranean project as well, because he was quite terrified by Napoleon, and he wanted a strong ally against the Napoleonic army. In the example of Britain, he actually surrendered every Mediterranean policies of Russia to Great Britain, and thus the forgotten history ended. Now here we fast forward to the USSR, and the USSR, of course, we are talking already after the First World War, where the four imperial spaces fragmented: the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German. The United States started coming into the area in the period between two wars, and of course decisively after the Second World War, as a replacement to Great Britain, which lost its drive in the area. The big struggle of Bosporus and Dardanelles ended up with Lausanne Agreement in 1923, Montreux 1936. Yes, the Soviet Union was not satisfied, but was unable to do anything because the Montreux Agreement is still valid, is still in force about Bosphorus and Dardanelles, and USSR and now Russia are still yet not satisfied with the major points of this agreement, but it's life. I mean, after the Second World War, USSR tried continuously to restructure Montreux Agreement, to add something, abstract something, but all in vain. The attempts has failed. And of course, the 60s, 50s and 60s, when the United States is a new guy on the block. And it is interesting because in the 50s, the United States came into the enforced political force and military force into the Mediterranean, carrying an assessment. It was internal Washington assessment, DOD, Department of Defense assessment of the US, that the USSR is in a position, was in a position as a sole controller of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. That's interesting to see, and we find that in the archives. It looks as though at this period, from 45 to 55, the United States assumed that the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East was under the control of the USSR and conducted accordingly in this. Immediately after 1955, the new great game started between the USSR and the United States of America. It is important to understand, or to basically look directly into the reasons of this. They were ideological, of course, which is a mundane matter, communism against capitalism or vice versa. Economic, because the United States came out in the process of grabbing everything which they could find economically, which actually coincided with the policies of the USSR, but came into contradiction. But the main reason was actually psychological. And I think that this psychological reason is still in force in this new great game which is being played or has been resumed between the United States and Russia. And that is that for Americans, if we strip the political discourse of all additions, we will see that the Americans are opposing USSR because they think that the USSR and now Russia, with certain, of course, exemptions that we've seen on the map, is the last imperial state on Earth. And the Americans are actually, quite frankly, are trying to oppose the imperial state, which they consider is Russia, which Russians are not considering themselves, because areas like Central Asia, Caucasus, or Siberia, which was actually conquered and incorporated into the Russian Tsarist Empire, Russians can consider those as historical territories of Russia, and thus not the territories of empire. Thus came from 1955 and further on the politics of deterrence. Who deterred whom? That's a big question. USSR deterred America, or Americans deterred USSR, or both of them deterred Europe. It is very difficult to understand, and basically there is no reason to enter into the specifics of this. What's happened, happened. The politics of deterrence came from all sides engaged. Greece and Turkey, which were actually encouraged by the Americans to guard the door to the Mediterranean from the USSR. This was the only reason that Greece and Turkey were included into the into the NATO bloc. Moscow, at the same time, focused on the Middle East and setting up the positions in Egypt, first of all, in Syria, second of all, and as I said, maintaining the Montreux Agreement alive or working in order not to be cut off from the entrance into the Mediterranean, because according to the Montreux Agreement, Turkey has a right, even now, to close Bosphorus and Dardanelles to anybody she deems or perceives is worth closing it from. From 1960, Russia, or USSR, by extension Russia, came back into the Mediterranean in an active role, because in 1960 was the maritime doctrine of strategic presence adopted by the USSR, and in 67, for the first time in history, the Fifth Fleet Mediterranean was formed and has been active until the disintegration of the Soviet Union. It is very important to mention that during this activity from 67 and up to 91, the Fifth Fleet had anchor bases in Mersa Matruh, Alexandria, and Port Said in Egypt, 3 places in Egypt, Tartus and Latakia in Syria, a port in Yugoslavia, Algeria, and Tunisia, and later on Tobruk in Libya. At a later stage. So that means that from 67 up till 91, Russia had a vast and absolutely visible military presence in the Mediterranean, and this presence counted. In 1991, Russia basically lost nearly all access to the major waterways, and the last ditch for Russia was Sevastopol of the Crimea, and that is the issue of the second liberation, in brackets, of Crimea, which is being discussed on and off with different facts, different assessments, and different conclusions. But we have to understand that for Russia, Sevastopol, which was in 2014 on the verge of being transferred to as a NATO port, was the last warm port of access for Russia into the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. So it was absolutely predictable what will happen in this environment. Thus, it was the Crimea, thus it was Syria, thus the tension came. Since Catherine the Great, the main antagonist in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean for Russia and the Soviet Union, and now again Russia, was Turkey and is Turkey. As a matter of fact, if we disregard the alarmist articles in the international media, Russia is not so worried, or even maybe not worried at all, about the United States presence in Mediterranean or in the Black Sea, as Russia is worried about Turkey. Turkey is a historical antagonist, and still nothing changed in the 21st century. So it is not an antagonist of fashion, but antagonist of the destiny and shaping of politics. So Russia now is trying to get back. It's not back, it's trying to get back. Why? Looking for strong mid position, anchorages, influences. There is this factor of the alternative gas, which plays a great role, because it's threatening the gas finds in Mediterranean, are threatening the, although not very much, because sometimes I hear the assessment that this new East Med gas consortium is a threat to Russian monopoly to provide gas to Europe. Russia does not have a monopoly to provide gas to Europe. Russia is interested basically in the northern Europe, to where the East Mediterranean gas is no threat. But Russia, of course, would be very much delighted to have a semblance of control of this gas venture, but it is more interested now in creating new positions in the hydrogen supply routes, which Russia considers extremely prospective, and is now already looking into entering this market. But this is another very interesting, although but very big issue about the green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and black hydrogen. And Russia is now in the position of providing the blue hydrogen, which is the majority of that. And the Mediterranean, it looks as though it will be playing again a major role as the route for new hydrogen trade, which is destined somehow to change the face of the energy business in Russia. That's already, we're talking about new buffer zones to replace those lost because of the brouhaha which happened from 1991. Market alternative, winning hearts and minds, that's always the same usual as it was in the beginning of the big, great game with Britain, then consequently United States. And now we might predict that this big game around the Mediterranean is being ruled by two actors, which are Russia and Turkey. That is basically the concept that Moscow is looking through. That's her looking glass, political looking glass on the Mediterranean. Now I will take questions, if you please. Now I have to see how to get rid of this, which is not very easy. Interesting. Can get.
Yes, Andrei, first, thank you. as for getting out of the presentation, you should again click on the arrow on the right on the top, and this should deactivate the sharing of the screen.
I understand that. I have to. My computer does not survive Microsoft.
I just wait for a moment, and I will try to.
Can you switch it off for me?
Okay.
Jesus Christ.
It's still on.
Yeah, it is still on. I have to somehow manage from my side. Very interesting. Oh. It looks as though I might be successful. I might be successful now. Hey, yes. Now I have to do something. Yep. All right. I guess that was a success, right? No, I don't hear you. Now.
Yes, sorry. I was just moved.
Okay. Yes.
Here we are. Thank you, Andrey, for this journey, which.
Well, yes, it was actually a journey, because you cannot do anything in 45 minutes, but it's sort of an overview of what we are looking into.
No, but it provides many insight and many stimuli about Russia's standing in and positioning in the framework, in the context of the Mediterranean, and what is the value of the Mediterranean for Russia's politics, at least high politics. Here I mean. Now, of course, I have and my notes, my questions, but I will ask you first if there is a first round of questions and the remarks from the students, or if they are collecting their ideas and then they prepare their questions. They're either through the chat or by preference. I suggest you to raise your hand and make your questions straight. And here is the first one. We have Afeverki, please.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I would like to thank our Professor Andrey for this interesting lecture. And my question is this: you have listed countries in which Russia historically, especially after the Cold War, Russia had a visible presence in a lot of Mediterranean and the North African country. I was just wondering to see this current Russia under Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov as a foreign minister. I'm much interested in the relationship between Russia and Algeria because of the energy sector. And also, I would like to understand, to give us some historic relationship between Russia and Algeria, and more also about Syria, because you didn't talk about the relationship between Russia and Israel. And so there is always this equilibrium where they want to keep their good relations with Israel, but also they want to also keep their presence in Syria. as Syria is a good ally of Russia, but still there is attack from Israel to Syria, and with the excuse of Iranian presence. So how is Russia trying to balance Israel, Syria, and Iran too? Because there is a stamp of Iran in Syria. These are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are quite major questions, of course. I will try to make it short. Algeria, the history of the relationship between Russia, USSR, then Russia and Algeria is not very long, as a matter of fact. But there is a certain character to this relation which distinguishes it from other countries of the region. Algeria is the biggest arms buyer, purchaser from Russia in the area, and at the same time, Algeria is not very politically dependent, or is not at all politically dependent on Russian influence. So, as a result of Algeria being a military contractor for Russia for quite some time and still now, the relations between Russia and Algeria are very low key. They are not public displayed very much, but I might say that even my experience tells me that Russia manages to be in a very, very working contract with every Algerian elite of the last 50 years, not coordinating, but consulting on the politics of the North Africa and, of course, southern Mediterranean. And contrary to some predictions, USSR and then Russia never became rivals with Algeria regarding the gas supply to Europe in the early stages, and I think maybe that was the reason why those relations became very balanced and unexciting, I would say, was that at the early stage, USSR and Algeria agreed upon the division of the markets for the gas provided into Europe. As I said previously, Russia is more interested in the northern European sector. Algeria, of course, has the biggest customer in Italy. And that is the actually the situation between Russia and Algeria. I have to say that it is being said or assessed that Algeria is probably one of the major partners of Russia today in the counterterrorism operations in the Northern Africa and the Middle East per se. And they say, it is said that the active counterterrorism operations are current between Russia and Algeria. But as I said, it is not being advertised very much. And both countries are keeping the lid on the particular information of this cooperation. But all in all, as a conclusion, I might say that maybe, probably, and basically it is a fact that Algeria now is the main Russian partner in North African conundrum that we're seeing today. Regarding Syria, it is a difficult situation, of course. Well, it has been said a lot about the reasons why Russia entered Syria in the first place in 2015. I might agree or disagree with a lot which is being said there, but I have to agree on one point, that Russia has taken upon itself, in addition to the military political operations inside Syria, which is fighting the opposition, fighting the ISIS and other jihadi groups. In addition to that, Russia has taken upon itself a very difficult and ungrateful track in the politics of the Middle East, and that is to talk to everybody: Syrians, Israelis, Iranians, Saudis, Qataris, you name it. Everyone, Russia is talking to them, except, of course, the jihadi groups and Muslim Brotherhood. It is a very difficult track, which has been proved in Libya, where it was implemented as well. And of course, there is a time, and the time is approaching, when you will not be able to talk to everybody, and you will have to decide which one of this everybody is more important than the other. It looks to me that Russia is trying to prolong this period for the simple reason that there is no actual final decision of how to do the job in the future. For example, Israel is being considered in Moscow as a very important contact, if not an ally. And it is a pain to coordinate the working relationship with the Israelis, especially on the level of special services, and the absolutely unacceptable conduct of Israelis in the territory of Syria. Russia understands that Iran, for example, is an integral part of the Middle Eastern politics, and Russia is absolutely against and proved this animosity to the change of regimes from outside influence, which also I can understand. I can feel an empathy to that position. At the same time, Russia is not very happy about the strength of Iranian position in Syria. Moscow thinks that Iran should be more, I would say, remoted, or the influence of Iran should be less than it is now, because at the end of the day, one has to understand that long-time goals of Russia and Iran do not correspond to each other. Each country has its own targets, its own sentiments, and its own tasks or goals to be achieved, which do not correspond to each other. And that also is a very difficult part for Russian political milieu to realize on the ground. All in all, that's basically the gist of it. How it is going to develop in the nearest future, I can't say, because it is very difficult to predict. For example, we've been very enthusiastic about the Astana process because it brought some results in the resolution of the Syrian crisis. But Astana is dead now. So, and there is no substitute to it, because Geneva is not substitute to Astana, because there are too many people who don't listen to each other and are not going to listen to each other because of cultural, political, family, tribal, clannish differences that they have. So now, what will be the substitute of Astana? Nobody knows yet, and I cannot predict that. But it looks as though this middle position of Russia in the Middle Eastern crisis is going to an end now. It's closing to an end. And in the nearest future, Russia will have to choose who is the main and who is the secondary of their objectives. We will see.
Okay, thank you. There is Giuseppe, you with
Yep.
another question.
Thank you very much. Can I go?
Yes, please, Giuseppe, please.
Thank you very much for the lecture. It has been incredibly interesting. I was reading also some months ago, in reality, about the fact that there was an idea of Russia, especially in the Syrian context, to gradually reduce the presence of military forces from Russia. So the number of soldiers, but also of funding employed in the region. Do you feel Russia is trying to act a strategy of retrenchment, or do you feel Russia is leaving these spaces, or do you feel that maybe Russia just changed priorities in its military presence in the Middle East and North Africa? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will try to be very short. Russia is not going to reduce their military presence in the foreseeable future in Syria. There are several reasons for that. First of all, the situation in Idlib and in the northeastern part of Syria is very troublesome. And it looks as though there is no close end to the military challenges inside Syria. Second reason is that Russia is keeping a very close eye on the Tartus military base and Hmimim Air Force Base. It's the only Mediterranean bases that Russia has now, and there is an understanding that without the resupply base in the Mediterranean, Russia is not going to maintain any significant presence in the area. That means there will be no projection of power, and without projection of power, there will be no participation in political events, there will be no free trade, there will be no seat at the table of decision makers in the area. And of course, Russia is going to be there militarily to keep an eye on Turkey and Iran, because Turkey is a big challenge in this area. Everyone understands that Erdogan has an eye on at least half of Syria and northern Iraq. And that means that somebody will have to challenge the plans of Sultan, and Americans are not going to do it, because not because they are very keen on Erdogan to snatch part of Syria, but simply because they are afraid of losing their own base, and they are afraid of losing the NATO member, the only NATO member who is actually inside the Middle East and could be used and has been used to extend the policies of NATO alliance in there. So Russia is not going to leave. Plus Israel, don't forget about Israel. There was a question about Israel previously, and as long as Russia is friendly with Israel and cooperate in certain areas, at the same time Russia is not very keen on Israelis to extend their military presence into the Syrian soil, however or whatever their justification is. So Russia is going to stay.
Thank you. And I personally agree with your point from an external position that Russia is going to stay there. It has been there since the 50s. There's no reason why to move, despite all the misery that the country is experiencing now. But the point is that the position of Syria won't change in the sense of the strategic location of the country and the cultural position of the country as well. Now, there is another question by Michele about, now they're writing, but please, guys, try to keep the question as much as possible focused on the point of the Mediterranean, which is, of course, a very large area, as we. But
yes. I see the questions, Masya. I see the questions. How do you see the future of Russian peacekeepers in Karabakh region? From the past experiences of Russia, we can see that when they enter the territory of certain countries, a peacekeeper, then they don't leave. Is going to be repeated in Azerbaijan too, because it was the only left country in surrounding that Russia didn't have military presence. Well, Russia doesn't have military presence in Kazakhstan, for example, as well. So it's not the only country. I'm not sure about what peacekeepers you're asking who entered and did not leave, because I'm not aware of any peacekeeping operations of Russia of long lasting, as a matter of fact. About Karabakh, it's too early to say. I mean, they just came in, and how long they're going to stay, I cannot predict. It depends on how this is to develop, and there are a lot of factors which influence this situation. The politics of Baku, politics of Ankara, who is trying to squeeze itself into area with all means possible, and of course the situation in Yerevan, which is not very stable. I mean, there is an open conflict between the president and the prime minister, and the situation is fluid. I wouldn't be surprised if this peacekeeping operation would not survive for a long period of time, but we will have to see. It's too early, I think. Could you give us a more in-depth overview of Russian perceptions of the Eastern Pipeline, also from the political point of view, given the role it has given climate policies in the EU and the new administration in the US for the US strategic view in Eastern Mediterranean? In few words, does Russia perceive it as a threat for its political ambitions in the Eastern Mediterranean? Well, first of all, I don't think that Russia perceives the East Med Consortium, gas consortium, as a threat yet, because this consortium has a long way to go, a very long way to go before they realize anything in a practical sense, because there is, as you know pretty well, there is quite a high level of tensions, political tensions, and sometimes a threat of military tensions around this situation. So Russia does not perceive it as a threat, but as I said previously, Russia, of course, would like to participate in something like that, if not for political, but commercial reasons, of course, and of course to keep an eye on the situation. There is one exacerbating factor, and that is that now we are witnessing the quite an interesting march toward the hydrogen energy economics. And this new consortium, East Med Consortium, might as well become a part of this new emerging economy, because the blue hydrogen, the best source of generating of blue hydrogen is, of course, natural gas. And in that respect, Russia is in a very strong position and might be looking into this consortium as a participant and not as a confronter. That's my take on the situation.
Thank you. There was another question before about by Michele.
Actually, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, my question was more about because I made it too wide, too broad on in the chat. I just wanted to ask if, Professor, do you think that there are any overlappings of interests between Russia and China over the area? I know that there have been increasing economic relations between China and the Balkans, for example. I know less about North Africa countries and their relation with China, but do you think there is any kind of possible conflict in the future over economic relationships with the area and China? It was just meant to be a quick question. Thanks.
Yes, and I will give you a quick answer. China is a clear and present threat, economic threat, a competitor to Russia in all those areas. They compete very strongly. China, because of certain factors, is on the top now, because China has much more resources than Russia, and the policy of China to enter economically in the region are very flexible and quite effective. And yes, the more time goes, the more this rivalry will be evident and present in the area. Yes.
Thank you. And me too have some, if in the meantime that other...
Professor, I'm sorry if I can just add one. I had the second chance, I'm sorry.
Yes,
there are other students.
Yes, but please very briefly, since it is your second round.
Okay, no, it's more like I understand. No, that's what I want. If there are other students, I can just don't ask.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, my question, Professor, is it's all related to our course about the MNE. The relation, I think you can, from what I heard, Russia is supporting the Tobruk government. Others are support Turkey, are supporting the internationally recognized, we could say, actually, but he has never any control over Libya. Nevertheless, even the west part of Tripoli. But at the same time, Italy is more, we could say, has good relation with the government in Tripoli. What do you think this relationship can have influence, or I don't know, between Russia and Italy? And more also, we could say Russia is supporting the Tobruk, so that Emirates and Egypt also support. So we can see some division in the Middle Eastern country. So how could Russia will try to manage this thing? And also, I heard a few days ago, it is more, I'm not sure if Sudan is part of the Mediterranean or not. Sometimes people mix it, but we heard that Russia is building military base in Sudan, which is very near to Saudi Arabia and Jordan. So how could you also try to explain those two things? Thank you.
Okay, let's try. Thank you about the question about Libya. That's actually my main specialty, Libya, as a country and as a process. Well, I usually hear this assessment that Russia supports the Eastern Tobruk government. That means not a government, but supports Field Marshal Haftar, who is self-appointed Field Marshal. Unfortunately or fortunately, the situation in Libya is more complex than what we assess traditionally. First of all, Russia has never supported outright the Haftar's army to the extent or to the level that Egypt and the United Arab Emirates supported them. Second thing is that the assessment that the Western government of Sarraj has no control on Western Libya is an erroneous assessment. It's not an erroneous assessment. It's a result of the propaganda distributed by quite a powerful media lobby of Khalifa Haftar. In fact, the Sarraj government has control. It feels pretty sure in its place. It has support of an extremely powerful city-state of Misrata, which has 90% of Libyan financial capacity concentrated there. As a matter of fact, you remember probably that Sarraj recently announced that he's going to leave his post, but then decided to stay, which is also an indication that he's powerful enough to allow himself to play political games, which actually he does. At some point in the development of Libyan crisis, certain private entrepreneurs of Russia who are more or less close to certain political groups in the political establishment decided that they are going to make a quick buck in Libya through through support or through engagement on the part of Khalifa Haftar. You have to understand that there is a very long tradition in Russia of loving people in uniform, and Haftar is very impressive in his top hat and heavy coat with epaulets or something glinting in the sun. But on the political level, this didn't happen. Even I'm being asked this question quite frequently, and I always say it is very easy to understand. You just count the number of times Haftar was in Moscow, and you count in opposition the number of times that representatives of the Western Tripoli government were in Moscow, and they have been in Moscow 3 times more frequent than Haftar. So there is a question. There is a question who Moscow supports. Actually, Moscow doesn't support anybody. It's the same position as in Syria. Sans, of course, military engagement. Is trying to talk to everybody and to occupy the middle ground in order waiting to see who is going to be the top dog. It's a dangerous position. We've been talking to the government quite a few times about that. The fact that this position should be changed. We have to make a decision whom to support and whom to contradict. There are camps, even in Moscow, different camps who oppose each other. I am, for example, in the camp which says that Haftar is not somebody you should rely upon. You should not support him because he is not a man of his word. He's not reliable. He shifts his alliances and positions, etc., etc. But there is a camp also inside Moscow on the political elite which says, no, Haftar is a military man. He says that he's fighting jihadists. Those people listen to the facts that Haftar inside his armed forces has whole battalions of Salafi jihadists fighting for him. It's a fluid situation, as always, in the Middle East, and I'm not actually sure that Well, since the beginning, Russia is not very keen to engage in the Libyan crisis. They were not interested. And I'm not sure that there is a needed level of interest even now to completely engage in the Libyan crisis, because the position for many years of Russia was the following: okay, you did it, you solved it, talking to the West. Now this position somehow changed, but not significantly. So I guess that we are going to witness this middle ground positioning of Russia for quite some time now.
Okay, are there any other questions for the second round? You just, otherwise I will try to make through my remarks.
Okay.
You know, in the sense that it's pretty interesting what you highlighted, in the sense of the pivotal role that Turkey has in its different shapes, from the Ottomans now to the Republic of Turkey, nationalist, secular, or Islamist, more or less oriented policies or leadership, has always played the pivotal role about, at least it seems to me, how Russia valued or conceives the Mediterranean, and better how it elaborated and shaped its policies. And that's I deem that it's a major area of research for the students here, and that was even an element that was mentioned frequently, but by other colleagues from Turkey, that we had a lecture last week about, how it is difficult for Turkey to handle relations with Russia, because first of all, because Russia, it is intended in Ankara as an international power, not just a regional power, so with much more broader and wider interests that Turkey has in taking into account in the elaboration of dealings, negotiations, and so on. So, but the point here is that the continuity of Turkey-Russian relations, as for the fate of the Mediterranean, of that area. Another point that I'm a bit skeptical about your remarks is about this prediction about the competition with China. You already know that I've been investigating a bit about it, and I saw if there is, of course, economic competition between the two, but as a matter of fact, there is quite of a division of labor, in the sense that China operates in fields and sectors that Russia is not that much operating, or even does not have the resources or capacity or capabilities to work on much on what China in terms of logistics or industrial facilities, because maybe it was one time, but it's not that much. So more the competition, I see, if there is a competition. On the other hand, I even sense that there might be some room of cooperation between Europeans and Russia as well, in order to contain China as an economic actor in the Mediterranean space, not as a political in the Mediterranean space, which in the sense, so it's the kind of that convergence on keeping the Chinese at bay as far economics is concerned, which is very relevant, absolutely relevant.
Well, first of all, I would say that I'm not expecting Europeans to cooperate with Russia on anything in the nearest future, because they are looking over their shoulder to Washington, what is going to say. So it's not relevant, at least for another 10 years now. Second, don't forget, China is already inside the traditional Russian market of arms and military material. And that is a blow to Russian trading fields, which Russia is not going to tolerate. So there will be a contradiction. There will be a confrontation between them, inevitably. And that will be not the first time in the history. You remember 1968.
That for sure, but even I was just reading an article about the trade, the arms trade in the Middle East and North Africa, and as a matter of fact, Russia has resumed, has been covering the 20% or more or arms trade in the region, and China is lagging far behind. And
yes, I understand this, but don't forget, Russia is on top in traditional spheres, and that is air defense, heavy military material, etc., etc. China now is going out with the new generation things like wing-long drones, which Russia cannot produce. And the drones, military drones now, are Russian, and are actually winning the markets with them. And they tested it extremely well in Libya. As a matter of fact, China and Turkey are now beginning to monopolize this market. Turkey with the Bayraktar 2M and China with wing-long. So we'll see. I mean, it's the market. It's the market competition. So it's gonna be. Although China also is more and more occupying the training sector. They're training officers. They're training military personnel. They already started using their own military forces abroad, which never happened since long time ago, especially in Sudan. Actually, I forgot to answer the question about the military base in Sudan. It's sorry. This is a new development. I mean, the drive is, the understanding is that Russia has to have military bases close to strategic, valuable geographic territories, and Middle East, of course, between them. And Sudan is a good place to start, as a matter of fact, after Syria, because it's close to the to Central Africa, to Africa heartlands. From Sudan, one has very easy access to Africa heartlands, and Africa is all the rage now. In Moscow now, everybody is talking about Africa, about how we're going to develop our relationship with Africa, how Africa is a very important continent, and how this opens a lot of opportunities. We will see. We will see how the resources of Russia that it has today will allow her to project its presence, even having the military base in Sudan, which actually I'm not very sure that they're going to construct in the first place, because we started talking about the military base in Sudan in 2017. I mean, 4 years ago, we started talking about military base in Sudan when Omar al-Bashir was still in power. Now they announce it's the third announcement during those years. We will see what happens.
Okay. Are there any other questions? And another question to you. At the end of the day, is the Mediterranean space a space of worth of value for Russia in itself, or instrumental to relations with Europe? Or
well, I got you. I understand where you're coming from. There is an answer. I do not separate the value of Mediterranean as a Mediterranean in itself and its relationship with Europe. There are traditional factors, of course, that bring Russia's attention. It's the 90% of international logistical trade, it's the main routes, it's blah, blah, blah. It is all there. But there is another factor which sometimes we are very reluctant to discuss. And you know that I'm very keen on that recently, is that the Eurocentric character of Mediterranean, the character which started with Mare Nostrum, is being transferred into Mid-Eastern character. Now the Middle East is beginning to play a decisive role in the Mediterranean political construct. And this is actually a very attractive feature that brings Russia's attention, because Russia instinctively understands that it has historical, psychological, religious, and cultural upper hand in the Middle East if compared to Americans or Europeans, excluding Italy, which has no less experience over there, if we forget the Crusades. So this is also an attraction to Russia, and Russia will not miss it. And it's a given, it's a fact, which is going to happen. I stress again that in all this situation, as I see it, the Turkish factor is one of the decisive ones. Russia is not going to allow Erdogan to, that's my personal opinion, mind you, is not going to allow Erdogan to realize its Mavi Vatan policies, because Russia perceives, at least today, Russia perceives that exceeding the interests of Russia in the area. This may change in the blink of an eye, but at least now we are in a situation. We are in a situation like this.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Other questions around for the moment? No, but I share with you that, and it is here on public, the fact that many of the political and economic dynamics affecting the Mediterranean space are the more and more led by countries in the Middle East. That is, for quite a long time, for quite a long time, not really a long time. There was a period where the initiatives on the Mediterranean space for crafting Mediterranean space came from Europe. Now the time is the more and more over, or at least in terms of initiatives. And the last forces that implemented some proactive initiatives affecting the Mediterranean space came from East. Came from the Middle East, and where all others, or generally the East, and in some way Russia is located in the northeast of the Mediterranean. No.
Yeah.
At least seen from an Italian point of view. That's for sure.
Yeah, sure.
And they live in the northeast of Italy anyway. And so this speaks a lot about the standing of international relations in terms of who's doing what, maybe who has overdone what, even in terms of capacities or capabilities, and to face of the classical, traditional counter-hegemonic alliances that features much the politics, the international relations of the Middle East and North Africa. But so that's another point. The stimulus for our students to make a research on is just the role shaped by Middle Eastern countries, or in order to shape and construct the Mediterranean space, the balance of forces, what is their understand, based on their understanding and their representation of the Mediterranean. Because as a matter of fact, one could think is that if you look at, for example, very little, if not any, of the countries on the southern shores of the Mediterranean has any Mediterranean department, or both in academics as well as in foreign ministries, or implemented or elaborated any Mediterranean policies or programs.
Well, wait, they will have. At least countries like Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, on a certain extent, they will have very soon, because these are very interested in exactly in shaping Mediterranean policies, because that's in their interests.
I think yes, we're all interested in, and let's see. Okay, yeah. So Andrey, thank you again for your contribution. It has been a great, as usual, a great pleasure, bringing us very many stimuli about thinking and re-elaboration. And the point of Malta was great. I didn't know much about, so thank you. And let's keep in touch with other research topics.
Yes, sure. Well.
And thanks to all the students, and again, good evening to you.
Yep.
And see you soon.
Thank you. Okay. See you. Bye.
Спасибо.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.